Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot.
Good evening, folks. Welcome to this special live audience taping of Left to Black. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Left to Black is a weekly video podcast that we have been producing now for 7 years here at the John Hope Franklin Center. It is a pleasure this evening to have Candice Hoyes, a classically trained jazz vocalist who has just released independently a recording of Duke Ellington songs called On a Turquoise Cloud, on a Turquoise Cloud. How are you doing today, Candice?
I'm so pleased to be here. I'm very well.
Okay. And you're in the Raleigh area these next couple of days, invitation of the North Carolina Opera.
Yes.
And you will be performing at Cam Riley,
Yes.
2 shows. So I'm sure everybody will, they don't know who Candice Hoyes is yet.
Thank you. Yes.
They will.
I invite everyone to come join us. But yeah, I've been very excited about this. I've been actually, this has been in the works for quite some time. It was one of my aspirations to come here because it's such a particularly musically rich community. And I just thought this would find a wonderful home here.
Yeah. Duke Ellington. There are generations of folks that when they hear that name, they think about one of the most important composers, arrangers, band leaders of the 20th century, right? One of America's true musical geniuses. And even though his music in some ways is well known, there's a way in which we now have probably a couple of generations of folks who don't really know Duke Ellington the way, say, other folks did. What drew you to Duke Ellington?
Well, I would have to probably count myself among them. I first heard Duke Ellington through my grandfather. So that was probably one of the most precious things that he passed on to me. I think at a sort of essential level, what drew me to Duke Ellington was that I saw myself in his music, my full self.
Yeah. Explain it. I mean, that's interesting, right? That you saw yourself in the music that was produced in some cases, almost 100 years ago.
1927 was the earliest tune that I recorded. Yes, I think that's sort of one of the mysteries of life that you get to enjoy if you're a musician, is time travel. And so I first heard jazz this way. My grandfather was what you call a jazz head. And so he could not consume enough of it, and he had his way of consuming it was in the living room with the lights very low, a drink of something brown in a fancy glass, and not really with the kids around.
And you're talking about a generation of black men for which that's their experience.
Yes.
Right, listening to jazz, right, it becomes this kind of space of leisure.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah. And it's not, it's a cultural thing, and he didn't take vacations. He didn't fly around the world, but that was where he flew around the world, was when he was sitting in his chair. And so I would sit down the hallway on the carpet and eavesdrop by myself, but with him, obviously.
And these are records, right? There's
records.
No CDs yet, right? These are albums in a record player.
Yes, records I can't touch. I could not touch those records. So that was where I had that experience, and that's actually a very musical experience, that duality of doing something with someone else, but very much sort of in your own way, a very intimate, personal experience, and that was my first impression of Duke Ellington. So it was highly personal. And then as I studied music, I studied classical piano, and I started exploring all kinds of musical styles with my voice as first in church and school, and then musical theater, as so many of us do in plays, and then studying classical music and performing jazz, gospel, and various styles that I did. Duke Ellington has always been a formative figure for me because of, I'd say, the way that he was able to encompass and kind of encompass many styles and yet create so much newness and innovation that he's always something I feel really close to, his music, but also forces me to stretch my mind, wrap around some of the fascinating harmonies that he composed, and then there's the subject matters and the forms that it took. Ellington wrote ballet suites. Ellington wrote long form jazz. Ellington wrote a Broadway musical. Yeah. It's just the very example of his prolific compositions shows you that many things are possible for us.
I know you worked with Wynton Marsalis at Lincoln Center Jazz, and Wynton has an album he did some time ago, Majesty of the Blues. And there's a track on it called Premature Autopsies, a piece that was written by the great jazz critic Stanley Crouch.
Oh.
And in that piece, which is actually performed, the vocals are performed by Reverend Jeremiah Wright out of Chicago. There's a point in the piece where Crouch talks about the beauty of Duke Ellington was that he never left the road, right? That he was constantly touring, right? And traveling around the country and traveling around the world as if he was incorporating everything that he heard and at the same time redistributing it to so many different audiences. So when you talk about, the wide range of ways that he influences the music, right? It just makes absolute sense. But we've heard you sing. We were listening to Come Sunday as we started.
Yes.
And I hear your voice. And clearly that's a voice that you knew that you had from a young age. But you go to Harvard and major in sociology.
Right.
What's that about?
I think it has to do with so much of what you just said about Ellington and that Crouch observed. I've always been curious about the world around me. Maybe the story about my grandfather illustrates that too. That I think that sociology gave me a wonderful lens of kind of a vehicle for my appetite for this world. And so I was able to also engage in critical theory and gain a certain strength in my openness, because you need that too.
Yeah.
You need that, you need the weight of facts, not to get there too fast. But you need, that's a part of power as an artist, is knowledge and a sort of conviction in your knowledge. And so I think that's what that part of my education gave me. And just joining that legacy of thinkers like Du Bois and some of the other thinkers who did pass through Harvard and other scholars too, like Paul Robeson is a really influential person for me, who never made me feel like by studying sociology, I wouldn't, it would be any kind of distraction from the musical work I wanted to do. And that in fact, they all enhance each other. I think that Robeson's scholarship was part of the reasons that emboldened him to go all around the world and speak for social justice and make his music and just do whatever the world kept telling him he was not allowed to do. So I think it emboldened me. It certainly made the research for this album seem very natural, which is great. So in the end, it was a good way education is a good way to spend your tuition money. And
you mentioned research, and because when you think Duke Ellington, and some of my students are here, and last night they listened to Take the A Train. They listened to It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing, like songs that if you know Ellington, you know those songs, right?
Yes.
You know Satin Doll, right? You might know Lush Life. You went deep into the archive. Yes. I think, at least for me, Come Sunday was probably the most recognizable song that was on the album. Talk about the process of digging in the crates, if you will.
Oh, yes.
To find these very exquisite Ellington compositions and what those compositions meant to you.
Well, I think I called upon a lot of different faculties in this journey. So you mentioned that I had this experience this privilege of working with Wynton Marsalis. It was after working as an opera singer and a concert artist, performing all over the world, which has been a fascinating part of my life for me, an educational, a humbling process to be a Black classical artist. The way that it's received differently across borders, and the questions you ask yourself about what narratives you want to tell and how many times over. And at that point, I was hired for this piece with Wynton because that's what the piece needed. It needed artists who were versatile in styles, classical, jazz, gospel, world music. And I got very curious about what would that statement be like if I were to make my first recorded statement. Ultimately, we recorded Wynton's piece, Abyssinian Mass, and that was the first professional recording I ever made. And that was in 2013, which is like an unpredictable gift horse that your first recording is with someone you've admired all your life and means so much to the world of music. Yeah. So that, right? And I said, what would my statement be? And I thought I really wanted, at the end of this time in 2013, to incorporate my multiple sides. I feel like they're valuable. I start listening to Ellington, and I find that there are no manuscripts for this music. I'm looking, I want to try them out. I want to sing them. And I'm singing everything around them, actually. A wonderful collaborator of mine from Jazz at Lincoln Center, my music director, Chris Padishall, is here with me, and we were trying out some Bernstein at that time. I was just like fevered. And so I listened to the Ellington recordings. They're all digital technologies. The center works, you know, like it's a blessing for all of us scholars and artists. The recordings were there, but the actual sheet music was not. And so then I went digging in the Smithsonian. And it was kind of like a rebirth for me. I found these manuscripts, penciled manuscripts of Ellington, of the great Billy Strayhorn, you know, replete with details and watermarked and numbers of women in the margins. I did see that. Church addresses, they were fully lived in. And it was the greatest gift. It was a great privilege.
So you telling me Duke Ellington is sitting there writing music and taking phone numbers?
That was what happened. No one would have, yes, because in fact, I learned about the archival research process through the application, something you probably know really well, but I had never gone back for my research in school that way, and there was nobody coming after, you know, it came into the Smithsonian writing on them. It was highly monitored and preserved.
Right. So
and it was the same hand.
Miles Davis tells a story in his autobiography about Duke had summoned him, wanted him to play in the band, and this is a young Miles, right, probably 21, 22, and he comes into Duke Ellington's dressing room, and he said Duke was sitting there in his underwear, right, and a T-shirt, and there were like two women sitting on his lap, and how he was like, I'm confused, right? That's not what I expected from Duke Ellington, right? So you confirming?
I'm not confirming. I'm just saying it could have been a colleague. I don't know whose number it was, but it felt, well, you know something, Mark? I'm kind of confirming, aren't I?
Yes.
But
that's okay.
No, but that's the magic of archival resources.
Yeah.
I can confirm, and I can say that that's how it felt to me, actually. Like I was invited into his private.
Wow.
What if I opened the book, your date book? That's what it was. When you write something, we all know this. We don't know what it means to anyone else.
Yeah.
You don't know if somebody, and I thought, I wonder if anybody would ever think that something that they scratch and pencil on, as much as he was on the road, how many things did he write?
Right.
How many things went in the waste bin and what went in this folder?
Right.
And I felt in this experience of taking myself in there in a t-shirt and jeans in a hot summer day by myself, scanning everything with a phone, turbo thing on my phone, like, it's just, I felt very integrated in this work, and that was why Ellington, and that was why the whole album, it's just, I saw myself fully in it. And I also felt that I was recording these not really for, it was a self-expression that was about making sure that these are enduring musical pieces.
Because you're doing recovery work. You're both recovering part of his legacy, but also introducing part of that legacy to folks who thought they knew the legacy, but also to a generation of young folks who know nothing about Ellington.
And that they might know about it in different ways, because what I also noticed is there's so many contemporary classical composers that use these styles. Yeah. And it's just so unjust that this critical link is missing. Yeah. It's so trendy to write these high-flying lyrical lines over certain harmonies, and it comes from somewhere. It comes from this part of the culture. Right. It must be visible. Right. It must be reinterpreted, and it must be labeled and esteemed. Yeah. And that was my goal in making this album. Like, it wasn't really a conscious thing about what making a recording debut would mean. But then I realized that I'm a recording artist for life. Like, I'm going to be doing this. I was like, this is that, you know how you said that Crouch talked about Ellington touring all his life? Right. Oh, I said, albums, this is it. I want to be a recording artist. I mean, everything else has been preparation for this. Yeah. So.
You've mentioned in other interviews that many of the songs that you chose were songs that he wrote for women's voices. How important was that for you?
Well, that was, when I say that I saw myself in these pieces, I have to elaborate and be specific. Ellington wrote these pieces principally, well, he wrote them for soprano vocalists, black vocalists, at different times in his career, starting 1927 with Creole Love Call, and ending his life with the Sacred Concert, where he wrote for Alice Babs' voice, who is a Swedish soprano, but that speaks to the global nature of his influence. But principally, he wrote for Kay Davis. And when I thought to look about who is this Kay Davis that inspired him to create a sound world for her voice, who could this figure be? I found so much, and I found a lot that sounded like me, a lot that resonated with me. Kay Davis was one of 8 music students at Northwestern in the 40s. Wow. And she did, with the prospects for a black woman being an opera singer, because she was a soprano, a classical soprano, one of the best in her class, prospects being so sort of bleak in a way, she continued it in her master's. Because
this is a generation before Leontine Price.
That's right. There are no assurances for a black opera singer, and I can tell you that now. And so I thought, this is amazing. It made sense of my sociology experience at Harvard. It made sense of my conviction that I was going to be a black opera singer. And he wrote these songs for her voice. He went to Northwestern. He listened to her in her senior recital, which was opposite a white tenor.
What must that have been like? Like, you up on stage doing your senior thesis, and you're like, is that Duke Ellington?
That's right. But I thought that, Mark, I was like, what if our American maestros went to seek out music students where they live? Mm-hmm. What if things were that, what if there were that much possibility because we had maestros and mentors who were seeking talent out like that more prevalently? I thought that was also worth honoring. Yeah. And then she joined the band, but not for a short time, for 6 years. He heard her opera recital, and he said, she's brilliant. I want her to join the band. and she did. She left the academy and went on the road with the Duke Ellington Band, which is not the typical story that you read when you listen to stories about early black musicians who usually hit a sort of club circuit or a show circuit at a young age because they don't have other options. This is an extraordinary woman. This is a bold woman, and there are wonderful oral histories and interviews with her because she only passed in 2012. Okay. So I start thinking about an album in 2013. It's just, there's a lot of magic around this, and that's also why everybody loves Ellington, guys. There's a lot of magic around it. I'm not the only one who would find myself in Ellington. All of us would, because these are our stories. These are our American stories. Right.
I mean, in many ways, he is the musical component. You think about his longevity, 1927, he dies starts his career in 1927, right? He dies in 1974. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about almost 50 years of a recorded life. Mm-hmm. In some ways, he's the musical component to August Wilson. Mm-hmm. You know, as August Wilson is writing this century of African-American stories, right? Mm-hmm. It's almost as if working in two very different historical quadrants, that Ellington is writing a soundtrack for that in that moment, right? But it also makes me think about, as we think about even the arc of our conversation tonight, Ellington begins to record right in the heat of the Harlem Renaissance period. Mm-hmm. He dies in 1974 as the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Power movement is waning. Mm-hmm. Folks probably don't immediately think about Duke Ellington as a political artist, but there is something important and political about him telling our stories at a time when few people had access to a broad audience the way that Duke Ellington did, right? So when you think about the things like, Black and Tan, right? This idea of doing something huge that told our story, right? Think about songs like Heritage. Think about Come Sunday, right? He's telling our stories from when we're waking up in the morning and we're going to church to when we're at the club at night. He's telling all these stories. What do you say to young folks now who are listening to Kendrick, who are listening to J. Cole, who are listening to Janelle Monáe?
Myself included.
Yeah. And they're wondering, what's so damn relevant to us right now about someone like Duke Ellington?
I think that you've expressed a lot of what's so relevant. And it's even more relevant for us in 2017 because we live our life as intense as Mr. Ellington lived, intensely as he lived his life and as much as he traveled, right, and covered so much ground. Every time we pick up our smartphones and every time we step out, we are always doing three things, right? And the news comes back. Even if you travel nowhere physically, the information comes at you so quickly that I think his ability to stay grounded in his values and to create his work from that place and let it work its way through the world and through people's understanding without compromising his perspective and his belief system is what makes him a relevant model for today. You can't be moved by all the noise around you. You must not be moved by the noise around you. I was thinking about this. There was a little trend, I don't know if it's still trendy or not, but the slow food movement, the idea of, you know about this, what I mean to say? Yeah. The slow food, that you must eat things that are healthy and cooked and sit down and enjoy and taste what you're actually tasting. Art is like that. Yeah. And Kendrick is like that, and Ellington is like that. And there's nothing you won't miss anything that way. In fact, there's a specific kind of work that you do when you read or when you take your art a little slower and you digest it. And when you make your art that way, for me, I'd say Ellington is a model for resistance for me today and for all of us. I was looking at him sitting in the train car. There's an image I saw, And I was like, why is his train car so, like, lavish? Like, it was so beautiful, it had all this stuff in it. And I researched it a little bit, and Ellington used to travel in his own car.
Yep.
Huh. Why did he travel in his own car? Because of Jim Crow laws, because he was segregated and had to travel in a black-only car. How are you going to make, he's supposed to make his epic music in that? No. He created his own space inside the fray. He was excluded by law. He was excluded in practice and in fact, and the entire world was looking at him a certain way. And so he created inside of that, his world, where he was going to make the statements that he makes now. You must have that resolve in what you're working on. You do not know what you're going to face all the time. And nonetheless, that's where we are right now, because we don't know, but what we know is ourselves, and we know our character and our values. So that's...
You talk about Ellington's values, and let's talk about that in a musical context, the integrity of the music, right? Because he didn't chase trends. He didn't decide in 1947 that he was going to start playing bebop, right? He didn't decide in 1956 that he's going to start playing hard bop, or he doesn't decide I'm going to do free jazz, right? But the irony of that is that everybody eventually had to come to him.
Right.
So Louis Armstrong comes to him, right? You know, he has to seek Ella Fitzgerald out, but Ella Fitzgerald come to him. Even John Coltrane, right, has to come to him. They do an album together, right? And when you listen to Coltrane and Duke Ellington in a sentimental mood, and it's like you couldn't have imagined that, you know, at some early when Coltrane is doing My Favorite Things, you can't imagine him sitting down and doing a recording with Ellington, but he knew that he had to sit down, right? And that speaks to just the giantness of the genius.
And a key part of that is, you know, in this day, we're also conscious about what other people think of us, right? Some more than others, some of us more than others, conscious about what people think, but everyone to some degree because of social media. And I think that's that quietude that it takes and the knowledge of self that will bring the right people together. Yeah. But also community building and inclusion was a part of it. Like, that's why an artist like me sees herself in him, because I am somewhere in there. I belong. He was an exponent of humanity, I think, and human expression. And so all those diverse artists, it somehow makes sense because it's in there. It's in there.
One of the things that's occurred over the last decade is Ellington's longtime collaborator, Billy Strayhorn, is finally getting his just due.
Yes.
For who he was as an artist. Part of that story, of course, is that Billy Strayhorn, in the midst of this particular moment in American history, and in Black communities, and in male jazz bands, in orchestras, is an out Black gay man.
In the 40s.
In the 40s. And so to think even about the ways that Ellington recognized the talent and the genius as being, and the contribution that talent and that genius would make, you know, to a broader public where, you know, whatever else is going on is unimportant in that context.
That's absolutely right. And through his work, Billy Strayhorn was able to achieve wonderful things that other people couldn't have predicted or seen. He was a young genius and actually wrote music in collaboration and in honor of Martin Luther King in his lifetime. And as you said, was a public figure who was a Black man who was out. And that's it. What can we be afraid of now when you know where our history and how contemporary these stories are? If you can know them, you can wear them, and you can make them your own. And what will you do? You know, I think that's been a big inspiration, and I did include some of Strayhorn's songs on my album, and part of it was so that I could tell that story as well. And also because actually it's so beautifully and magically tied together. The person who debuted one of Strayhorn's most famous melodies is called Lush Life. The person who debuted that was Kay Davis, the same woman who was singing these soprano vocalises. Played that for the world heard that song for the first time from her at Carnegie Hall. So Ellington was able to move across borders of all kinds, and it always made sense because it was always authentic.
Yeah. What's the reception been like to the album so far?
It's been exciting. I think it's opened possibilities that I didn't see, because I told you it was a very revelatory, intimate experience to discover the songs. It was a huge communal joy to put the album together. I executive produced it. A dear colleague of mine, Ulysses Owens Jr., produced the music. And then a lot of my colleagues and people I admire from Jazz at Lincoln Center who toured with me on the first project that I worked with, the Abyssinian Mass. When I told them what I was researching and doing, they were happy to be a part of it. And so that was a wonderful family to join. And taking it out into the world has been a breathtaking experience. Taking some of the music to France for the first time. Mm-hmm. I'd say places I played when I was exclusively singing opera. I still sing opera. I sing many styles still. But taking this project to new places has been fascinating because it starts different conversations. Yeah. I'm not interested in a lot of conversations about myself. I'm interested in hearing other people's experience, and this music really engages people and presses different buttons and lights them up in a different way, opens their mind, because it does sit between genres. It displaces people at first, but I hope, and I think I can be assured because it's Ellington, that there's a beauty in it and a sincerity that appeals to. But I think I've just learned a lot about life through the album so far. It's been good.
What are you thinking about doing next?
Definitely working on my second album already. And I think a lot of this spirit that you find in the first will always be there. I feel like this first album, I needed the fire of it. Yeah. I needed it in my life, and it focused the fire of me. So I think that it'll be probably even stronger in the second album.
Is there a composer that you're thinking about?
Yeah,
engaging like you engaged Ellington the first time?
Well, some of my own writing will be on there, so that I'm one of the composers on the second album, and it'll be other people who are socially and personally important to me too. I think that's always got to be. I'm more interested in touching people and making them feel stronger, making them not feel alone. Those are the things and building community. Mm-hmm. So that's how I'll find the music for this project. That's how I have been finding it.
So I know there was a piece that a magazine did a few months back, because I would describe you as a bit of a dandy. And so when if someone goes to your if someone goes to your website, what they see are a lot of bright colors, someone that's very style conscious. How much of that is also influenced by the music that you sing?
That's a fabulous question. That's absolutely true. Everything comes out of music for me. Yeah. Always has. I love poetry. I love books. I love traveling. I love food. I love dancing. It's all related to music. A lot of the style experiences I've had since I became a recording artist are because I'm passionate about Black culture and art. And so one of my collaborators is a Black designer, actually from North Carolina, named Charles Harbison. And I met him at Jazz at Lincoln Center, actually, because he loves jazz. And we talked about books and food, actually, because he's vegan. We didn't talk about music right away, but he was there because he loved music. And he said, I'd like to dress you. And I was like, what do you mean dress me? I hadn't thought about it. He was just a bright spot in the room.
Yeah.
And then I ended up, he played my music at New York Fashion Week for his 2016 collection, and I was there. And I felt at home. If it doesn't fit me, I won't do it. Because I'm just making up the rules anyway. So, if it doesn't fit me, I can't do it. It's not going to make sense. But his clothes make sense. His clothes are actually, and the style I like to wear is sometimes pants, but I like to play with gender. Yeah. So clothes that feel empowering and colorful and kind of liberating. Yeah. That's my style, I guess.
So I got one more question for you before we open it out to the audience, right? And it's the question that I ask about 75% of our guests.
Okay.
So I'm a New Yorker also, right? And one of my favorite places used to be Tower Records, especially the one on Broadway in West 4th. And you would go in the Tower Records and they'd have their little magazine, and in the back of the magazine they had a section called Desert Island Disc. Right, if you were stuck on a desert island and you had to have a handful of albums, right? So I'm asking you for 5. You stuck on a desert and for the rest of your life, and you need 5 albums, 5 discs, 5 records. What are those 5 records?
Okay.
And I know that's hard for an archivist.
Yeah, I know. I can just, this is just a fantasy question, so you're not going to send me to the island, right?
No.
I'll just say, we got it from here, because I've been listening to the Tribe album all the time. Yeah. I know that's just now, but now might be for the next 20 years. I don't know.
There's something timeless about it. There's no question about it.
It's a critical time in my life, so it's a pivot in my life. So there's that. Baroque duets by Wynton Marsalis and Kathleen Battle.
Okay.
Thriller.
I would go Off the Wall instead of Thriller. But
okay, I'm gonna amend that. Thank you. You got me on that.
Yes.
Thank you. Off the Wall. That's true. Because that'll pick me up in the morning. Recording, I don't know which recording I would choose, but I would take one of the Marriage of Figaro. I love that opera, and that would help me occupy a lot of time. It's like the longest soprano role there is. And which Nat King Cole? One of the Nat King Coles of or Louis Armstrong. Or Louis Armstrong 5. Gosh, I don't know. Yeah. I want to feel good every day on this desert island alone. I think that's like choosing between the man of your dreams, Louis Armstrong or Nat King Cole. Nat King Cole, and I can't commit to which one, but one of the early Nat King Coles with his trio.
With his trio? Yeah.
One I'd have to pick. That's my 5. Okay. Wait, did I list any female voices? I guess I'll have to be singing a lot to myself. No, Kathleen Battle, one of my favorite voices ever. Right. That's quite good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That would make a good weekend shut-in, too.
Yeah.
If you don't end up on an island.
Well, thank you for joining us.
This has been an honor and a pleasure. I love your show, and I love your work that you're doing for the culture and for the world. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything black, culture over everything, y'all. We take and back.